Okay, hello again. I want to, having heard from Adi, I heard that I was rushing. I didn't hear from Adi, but I'm aware of the fact that I was rushing during my last talk. I tend to speak fast, so if I'm talking, if I'm going too fast for you, and you know, as I mentioned to you, you're welcome to ask questions along the way. That's an absolute necessity to make sure that I don't lose you for one thing, and that you follow what I'm saying. So basically, great. Okay, I didn't realize that we don't have. מישהו יודע איך מורידים פה את המסך? המסך. לא ככה. מקרן עוד. איפה? זה? נראה טוב. אוקיי, עברו לי לה כל. אני עושה דרך העמדה. לפטופ VGA. תאורה. אנחנו לא רוצים. אולי תלחץ אליו מלמטה. כי הוא לא מגיב פה. רגע, אני אעשה אוף, שם נעשה עוד פעם און. כן, אוקיי. אז, אלון, תנסה לעלות שם ולחץ על און. אז אלון, okay, something's coming up. Wonderful. Okay. Something was coming up, so give it a minute. Okay. So just to remind you where we were last time, and sort of and make things maybe a little more clear. I finished by giving you an example from Marr, right? Remember? So I guess you're probably all familiar with the idea of Marr now, and that is, okay, if you see here something, okay, one minute. Further down. If you see something, no, come on. Okay, you see something which, if you were to measure it with a light meter, you see that this is here, constant light, then there's a ramp here, and then it's dark here. Well, we all see these sort of bands, a band of light here and a band of dark here, which here it seems to be darker than the background. And the reason for this is we said, okay, one can understand that at the level of processing already at the retina. Remember, so we talked about retinal ganglion cells which have the center surround mechanism. And I said, okay, we can understand this as a sort of the output of an array of such photoreceptors which cover the visual field, okay, is going to be a convolution of the difference of Gaussian, which is the center surround, if you want. We can think about it this way, sort of center surround organization of the receptor field of the retinal ganglion cells with the image. And the idea of the convolution is that, if you remember, I slid sort of this receptor field across the visual field. Well, in essence, you know, this is sort of to give you an idea that this is sort of a convolution operation. But the way to think about it is that each receptor, or this ganglion cell, has a specific receptor field in different positions, right? And so, we draw it here, right? So remember, each ganglion cell has its own receptor field. So this is the receptor field of the specific ganglion cell. So you can think about this as an array covering the whole visual field, okay? And what we plot here is, okay, here's the sort of luminance changing from a bright area to a dark area. And this would be the output of each. So each, there's a function here. And the function represents the output of each neuron, okay? So here's neuron number 1, the next one is neuron number 2, and so on. And they're organized in an array, a linear array along the x-axis, like this, okay? So this was, so when we think about a convolution, this is the output, and if you think about this, this is now the population response. It's not a response of one neuron. It's a response of population of neurons, each of them having a receptor field in a different position. So the first one is for position which is here, the second one is overlapping within, bit shifted, and so on and so forth. So this is the output, remember? And we said that what you get here is an amplification of the edge, right? So you get greater activity for a neuron whose receptor field is at position B than one in A, and also a drop in the activity of a neuron whose receptor field position is at C with respect to D, okay? So you sort of get this function which we described here. Okay, so that was point number 1 that I wanted to address. Second point is, remember going back to Marr and the zero crossings. Okay, so I've made a few points here. How many of you are from background of physics? Okay, so you guys know what an operator here, what an operator is, but I want to make this clear to the others. So I said that if you think about the receptor field of neurons already at the retina, these retinal ganglion cells, they're sort of what we call a second derivative operator. Well, let's understand that. Since you're sort of from elsewhere, I think that let's understand it. So what do we talk, when we talk about a first derivative, what do we mean? We say, what's a first derivative? You take the value of x plus delta x, subtract from it the value of x, right? And divide by delta x, right? That's the derivative. That's the first derivative, right? That's f prime of x, right? When delta x is to the limit of 0, right? What is it equivalent to? We can think about this as the following. You sort of think of an operator which looks like that. You give a positive weight, f of x plus, so this is x here, okay? This is the x dimension here. So x plus delta x would be this point here, and you give this a positive value. This would be f of x plus delta x. And this would be a negative value because this is f of x, and you subtract from f of x plus delta x, f of x, when delta x is sort of at the limit, right? So this is what's called a first derivative operator. Now take this and apply to this another first derivative operator. What would it look like? Okay, so now, how do you apply another first derivative operator? You take this and you apply it again. Okay? So what do you get? You get something, okay, so you apply this again on this one, and what you get is something which looks like that. Again, this is x. Okay, so you give a positive value to something in the center, and negative values to something at the surround. Exactly as we see here. What do we see here? Positive value for something at the center, negative values to something at the surround. Okay? And that is, okay, what we call a second derivative operator. Okay? And the interesting thing about it, as we said, is, okay, this is a good operator if you want to detect an edge. Right? Now, I was asked by someone, I don't remember whom, why should we use a second derivative operator and look for the zero crossings rather than the first derivative and look for the positive value of the first derivative? Was it you? The name, please? Alex. You're right. And I said, in principle, they're the same. But setting setting the threshold is somewhat arbitrary, right? Well, looking for a zero crossing, well, a zero crossing is always the point which it crosses the value of zero. Okay? So that's why, although they're equivalent, there's a practical problem here of where do you set the threshold. Okay? And that is the point that that's why the zero crossing is somewhat better. Okay, now another thing to notice is the following. That if you take an image and you convolve it by this function, the second derivative of the Gaussian, okay, so this is a home problem for you. Take a Gaussian and take the second derivative of the Gaussian. Okay, so meaning, okay, you go here and you say, here, the first derivative is 0, becomes positive, then it becomes 0 again, negative, then 0 again. That's the first derivative. Now for the second derivative, what sort of shape do you get? Well, you should get that shape. Okay? And so this is actually a second derivative of the Gaussian. Okay? And when you have an image, so remember, what we want to do is look for the second derivative of the image, where there's a change in the image, an edge in the image, which corresponds to zero crossing in the second derivative. Well, and this is just for the fancy stuff for the ones who are mathematically initiated, one can show that taking the second derivative of the Gaussian, so this triangle here is simply a second derivative, okay? So this is sort of a second derivative in 2D. But anyway, it's a second derivative of a Gaussian, and you convolve it with the image. It's the same as taking the second derivative of the image and convolving it with a Gaussian. Okay? So we want to do this. Right? We want to take the second derivative of the image to find the zero crossing and convolve it with the Gaussian. Well, one can show that this is mathematically equivalent to taking the second derivative of the Gaussian and convolving that with the image. Now that's exactly what we apply. Okay? So here we are. Here's the image. Remember, here is the second derivative of the Gaussian, the receptive field graph, or the difference of Gaussians. Okay? And when you apply the difference of Gaussians on the image, this is what the output would look like. Okay? Now this may be a little difficult for you guys. So this is exactly this is very similar to what I showed you just a minute ago when I was talking about the Mach bands, right? But we're giving a different image, we're getting a different response, right? And this is again to point out, this isn't the response of one neuron. These are the response of an array of neurons, sort of reflecting the retina, where each neuron has a different receptive field, right? So that would be, and the level of, the luminance level here corresponds to the response of that neuron. So it's exactly the same as we've shown before, okay? Bottom line, in this 10 minutes that I've spent now, sort of as a rehearsal, what we see is, again, that there's image processing already at the level of the retina to accentuate basically contrast, right? That's what we want. We want to get already at the level of the retina, and we're accentuating edges, okay, where there's a change in the luminance, which corresponds to local contrast. Okay? So that is the point, that is the the take-home message from this one, and we talked about multiple scales. I'm not going to get again into that, but if there's questions, we can sort of get back to that later. Okay, so that was sort of a rehearsal, and now I'm moving on to basically we have covered basically the response properties of neurons in the retina. And I haven't mentioned this to you, but just briefly, that there's a sort of relay station between the retina and the cortex, and that is what? LGN. The LGN, in which basically the neurons have a similar center surround properties, so they're indeed, it is often called a relay station. Why is that? Because I haven't lowered this enough. Often called a relay station exactly for that reason. Okay, so here we are, and now this starts my next lecture, which is basically image processing at the level of V1. Okay, and I will briefly talk about some of the physiology, which I think you've covered with Adi, Yugal visual, sort of orientation selectivity. But first I will talk about retinotopy, just the basic representation, the spatial representation at the level of V1, which is basically reflecting already the representation on the retina. Okay, so here's an example for you. I mean, here's an image that you see. Okay, so here's this lady that you see, and here's your brain sort of horizontal section. Yes. Names, please. That's we.
Daniel.
Daniel. Yeah.
You upload in the high order visual processing.
Well, this is sort of in between. Okay, so this is. I forgot to send the lecture of the day, which is another lecture. We have 4 lectures before you guys are giving your lecture. Who are the ones who are giving? I better see you soon, okay? Because if I don't see you soon, you're going to be in deep trouble, okay? So please see me after the lesson, okay? So today we're going to talk about basically image analysis at the level of V1, and then the next one is going to be about motion analysis, and finally we're going to talk about object analysis, and then it's in your hands, okay? So sorry for this. This was basically I constructed this in 2 last days. I mean, so I've changed this so it's not online, but you will have it immediately after my. Okay, so here we are, and you see this lady in front of you, and you're fixating, say, just between her eyes. Okay, and the idea is of retinotopy. Have you heard the concept? Meaning, slicha, guy with a tool. Yeah, you've heard the concept. You were nodding your head. Okay, so please sort of reiterate what the concept is and tell me your name.
Peter.
Peter, yeah.
Basically, it means that every part of the retina is represented by spatially, has the same. The visual cortex has the same spatial organization as the retina.
Correct.
View.
That's fine. Yeah. Okay. This is an aid for you. So I'll sort of try to sort of explain this with your help. So we're seeing here this face here, and you are fixating at the nose here between the 2 eyes, and you can think about the points in space numbered 1 to 9 as sort of in visual space. Points in visual space on the left, in the right visual space, and the left visual space. Okay, and the point is that on the retina, as you've started to say, you can think about, okay, here's, let's say, point number 5. It's on the fovea. That's where I'm fixating. So it is projected to both eyes, because that's in the binocular region, which is most of our region. And nearby neurons are basically representing nearby areas in the visual field. But this is not out in the visual field in terms of sort of world coordinates, but rather in retinal coordinates. Meaning what? Meaning what? Okay, so here's, okay, so now I'm fixating the nose. Say that I'm moving my eyes to here. What would happen? The fovea, the center of gaze, would be now at the left eye, right? Okay, or the right eye of the girl here, okay? So everything would shift, okay, accordingly, okay? So receptive fields are basically in retinal coordinates, meaning that if you're fixating here, and here's the receptive field of a neuron, okay, in the right visual field, if you are moving your fixation out to here, what's going to happen to the receptive field? It's going to move accordingly, right? Keeping the same distance. So it's going to be here, right? That's the same distance. And that's why it's called in retinotopic coordinates. It's not in world coordinates, in retinal coordinates. Is that clear? Okay. Okay, so, and the next thing to notice here is, okay, so most points are projected to both eyes, except for the very lateral ones, number 1 and number 9, which are only represented. So number 1 would be presented only in the left eye, and number 9 here would be presented only in the right eye. So that's the monocular parts of the visual field. Close mind to appreciate what the monocular ones are. And then you have, okay, I think we've covered this very briefly in basic physiology, is, okay, that you have this information going through the optic nerve and through the optic chiasm. So let's look at the red lines here, which correspond to area of the right visual field, okay, and that would project to the left geniculate here, right? So the basic principle is that you have the retinotopic such that the left hemisphere represents the right visual field, and the left hemisphere right visual field, right hemisphere left visual field, okay? Nothing to do with the eyes, it has to do with visual field, okay? Basics here. And this sort of, so if you record from neurons here, nearby neurons have nearby receptive fields, meaning that the topography is maintained, okay? So that nearby neurons represent nearby receptive fields, and this is again projected forward to the primary visual cortex, what we call V1, and again topography is preserved, okay? So the left hemisphere in V1 would represent the right visual field, and the right hemisphere the left visual field. Good. The basic, that's basic topography. Okay. Another fact is that there's a magnification factor. Magnification factor means that if you look at fovea, which is the central 1.5 to 2 degrees, okay, there's more neurons representing the central visual field than the periphery. Much more neurons representing the central visual field. And surprise, surprise, this is where we have our best acuity, right? So when we're reading, we're moving our eyes from one word to the other because the word has to be within the fovea, so we'll be able to resolve it, okay? And what you see here is basically a cut through the cortex. This is what's called the calcarine sulcus. Maybe it's easier to see here because this is more naturalistic. So you see here, this is sort of a slice, and you see sort of this is sort of calcarine sulcus, which is going from back to forward. Okay, you can see here. There's the calcarine sulcus again, corresponding to this one here. Okay, and you can see here the representation of what is central vision, what's called the macula here. Okay, which is the brown area here, and this area here is represented in the lower calcarine. Okay, so you see that the lower visual field is represented in the upper calcarine, and the upper visual field is represented in the lower calcarine. And you notice this is half the visual field, the right visual field. So this would be, what do we have here? This is a picture of what? Left hemisphere or right hemisphere? Left hemisphere, correct, yeah. I didn't hear you, that's all. Okay? Okay, so you see the magnification that the central area has a much bigger representation than the periphery. Okay, and this has been known for quite some time. I mean, the first evidence of this came from working from humans by Holmes almost a century ago. You know, this is 1918, towards the end of the First World War. Holmes was an American who studied soldiers who were in the First World War and had a bullet hit or shrapnel or something like that that rendered them blind in a certain area of their visual field. Okay, what he did was basically map this. What were the areas in which you could see this blindness? And so what you see here, again, this is the one hemisphere. You see, this is the back of the brain. This is the occipital pole here, and this is called the calcarine sulcus. And you can see here, just to give you an idea, you see here, these are X's here, and they correspond to the fovea here. So how did he get this? Well, of course, he didn't have imaging, didn't have a way to know what the brain looks like, unless the poor person died and you can do a post-mortem. Okay? Now, in the early 1920s, this was before the days of penicillin, people who were, got shrapnel in the brain often did die. Okay? So he was able to do post-mortem studies and sort of correlate their visual problems, which he saw before they died, with the injury that they suffered, that he could conclude from the post-mortem. And from that, he found that there's an orderly mapping, okay, in which you see, as you move from the most posterior part of the cortex, the calcarine sulcus, further anterior, forward, okay, you see that, notice the dots here, the black dots here, they represent the periphery. And as you're moving here, okay, so the most anterior part represents the periphery, and there's fewer area, there's a smaller area that analyzes the periphery than the fovea, okay, although the periphery is much bigger, okay, so that's the basic principle here. Yes?
Maybe I missed, but I don't understand how he connected between the brain. I mean, how would he know the area in the brain that corresponds to?
Well, he saw, what he found out was that people were rendered blind in some part of the visual field. So let's say you got the shrapnel in your right hemisphere, okay? Then typically, let's say it was obliterate the whole visual cortex in the primary visual cortex of the right hemisphere. But typically, what you found is that the patient was unable to see anything on the left side of the visual field, okay? Sometimes it was a smaller lesion, because a smaller lesion, let's say that the smaller lesion was only at this part of the cortex. Now, he knew this only post-mortem, of course, but he did test the soldiers before they died, okay? And some of them ended up dying, so we had the chance to do the post-mortem. And then he saw, let's say that you had a sort of a problem in that part of the visual field. Well, later, when you checked, you found that, okay, there was a lesion due to the shrapnel or whatever in that part of the calcarine sulcus. So that's how he corresponded. Okay? Very brutal, I don't know, but a great way of doing science with very little means, right? So that's really impressive in that respect, 100 years ago. Okay, if we jump, yes, please.
It's not strictly related, so maybe
it's not what?
It's not strictly related to the class, but I've been always wondering, why is the optic cortex so in the back?
It's not optic cortex.
It's like the visual cortex.
The visual cortex. Why did the visual cortex ended up being so far away from the eye?
Yeah.
Good question. I don't think there's a good answer to this. Okay. I don't think there's really a good answer to this in terms of the sort of wiring distance. Of course, if you want to optimize the wiring distance, you would have thought that visual cortex would be next to where the eyes are. Okay, rather than the orbital frontal cortex. Well, but you can think a lot of our senses are in the front. Okay, so for smell, orbital frontal cortex is quite close to for smell and taste. Okay, so there's an issue here of why. So all sensory cortices ended up being in the back of the brain. Okay, and it could be, as I mentioned before when I said evolution, you sort of hit a path on the evolutionary tree, and then reversing it back is something that you cannot achieve. Okay?
It just wastes. It wastes a lot of energy. I mean, transferring through long
I don't
axons is a lot of ATP for action potential.
No. So you are right in principle that you could think that you would want to place. You would want to place the visual cortex next to the eye, and that's not the case. Okay.
I would speculate that because we are primarily visual creatures, you can more branch out from the information processing early on. I mean, for example, we have like this blind vision.
Blind sight, you mean?
Yeah, but the blind sight, yes. So they can be like branches on the way to the visual cortex, which, like, say, more influence subconscious influence blind vision. So if you have a numbered wiring path, you can, like, say, more have side branches.
I don't think,
It's
but frankly, you're taking us on a side road. I don't want to take that road, okay? I don't have a good answer, and I don't want to take that road, okay? But I do want to get back to what we're talking about, and that is, okay, following what I've told you, this is in the 1970s, Samir Zeki has started to map visual cortex, basically following Yuval Weasel. Also Yuval Weasel did something like that. That's just to show you an example in which there's an electrode track here, and you record the receptor field of cell number 1 to 32 while you're inside V1. Okay, now it's easy to recognize V1 also in terms of the anatomy, because V1 has this classical stripe of generic. Okay, so you can see something. Layer 4 in V1 is thicker than in other areas. You can actually identify V1 on a subject-by-subject basis and tell, okay, this is where V1 ends. Okay, and so he's recorded through V1 here, and what you see here is what I told you. Okay, that nearby neurons have overlapping receptor fields, and they change slowly. Okay, it's not just random, haphazard. Receptor fields of nearby neurons respond to basically respond to the same locations of visual field with respect to retinal coordinates. Okay, and you can see here that as you move from the electrode from number 1 to number 32, receptor fields change, but they don't change, haphazardly. Nearby neurons respond to the same area on the retina. Okay, another way to do this. And have you heard this? I think most of you haven't heard this. Alon may have heard this in a different course that I'm giving, and I'll talk about it, a bit about the physiology, then I'll move to the psychophysics and some other, we're going to have some computational stuff coming up later. So everyone has something he knows and something he completely doesn't know. Okay, that's my target here to the class. Okay, and so this is a little later, Roger Tuttle in the 1980s. And what they've done, this is a technique which is called 2-deoxyglucose mapping. And the idea is basically that you use a sort of glucose which gets stuck in one configuration and doesn't break to sort of, you cannot utilize this as for ATP usage. And this is very effective if you sort of use 2-deoxyglucose and you label it radioactively, so you can know, okay, which are the areas which are in metabolic, have a high metabolic use, and therefore, if you present something, a stimulus on the screen which is sort of flickering, then typically, okay, the visual neurons which respond to this specific area in the visual field would be highly active, and therefore would have high metabolic rate, and you do that, and so they utilize the oxyglucose, and they can't break it, and therefore it's stuck there, and since you have sort of radioactive labeling, you can actually notice it as you're looking at a slice of cortex. So let me explain what we see here. This is the stimulus that they've used. So you see there's sort of this bullseye, not a checkerboard, but it's sort of a bullseye, okay, in which you have on each of these sort of, this is the vertical meridian, this is the horizontal meridian, okay, and it's flickering, okay. So neurons who have receptor fields in that area are going to be active. Well, neurons, a neuron has a receptor field here, it's not going to be active, right? Okay. And now look, this is sort of a cut through layer 4 of primary visual cortex, and what you can see here basically is, first of all, you see this image here. This is on the right visual field, so this is a cut through the left hemisphere. And what you can see here is that you can sort of corroborate each position here with a position here. So for instance, let's look at this one here. This corresponds to here. Okay, so basically you're replicating this sort of grid or how would you call this, radial grid that you have here. You're replicating it on cortex, again because of the regular mapping, right? If there was no mapping, you would not see this. And you can see that this area corresponds to the fovea. So again, the magnification factor, okay? And you can see, okay, so this line, whoops, sorry.
How did they label only these parts?
Because you show this stimulus. So you show this stimulus, which is sort of this radial, and if you think a neuron which has a receptor field here have responded very highly, while a neuron which has a receptor field in this gray area does not respond. Okay, so that's how you get. That's the nice thing about it. It can replicate sort of this mapping, and this is what's called a log polar mapping. So if you look at eccentricity, okay, first of all you see, okay, the horizontal meridian is this line here. Horizontal meridian being this one. Where would the horizontal meridian here of this would be? At the other hemisphere, right? Corresponding hemisphere. Correct. Okay. You look at the vertical meridian here. Okay. And the vertical meridian, where is the vertical meridian? Let me see. I think, well, the vertical meridian should be here next to the fovea. So this would be vertical meridian. So let's look. Okay, here, this arc here corresponds to that arc here. So these are this line, that line, and that line correspond to the arc. This is the outer arc, which corresponds to this one. Middle arc here corresponds to this one. Inner arc here corresponds to this one. So you see that, and think about it, this is sort of a cortex. So you see that this area here is about a third, right? Well, it's, the middle arc here. So there's, again, the magnification factor that I mentioned to you. Okay? So this is orderly mapping in which, why did I call this a log polar? We'll see in a minute. I'll get back to that as we sort of repeat this. But just to say this briefly, because in terms of eccentricity, you can think about this in 2 dimensions. Okay, maybe that's worthwhile to see here. Usually you can think of something, say that you have something in a certain position of visual field. You can think about it as its eccentricity in the x-axis and the y-axis, right? Let me draw this to you so we are clear about this. Okay. Something about polar coordinates. You guys know what polar coordinates are? Yeah, most of you do. Someone doesn't know? Okay, for just briefly, here's a stimulus which is here. You can think about this in terms of x and y, right? But you can also think about this in terms of distance from the origin, thank you. And, okay, r and theta, right? So r corresponds to the distance from origin, and theta corresponds to the polar angle, okay? So what you see here, basically, in visual cortex, is this log, first of all, a log polar mapping in which, in one axis, what's changing is log eccentricity, it's r, but log of r, okay? And that's why, for very small r's, there's a greater representation, and as you're changing r more and more, it's changing in terms of log r and not just r. And in another direction, it's theta, the angle that I've described here. Okay? So we will see this in a minute. And the next thing I want to show you is, okay, this is a very basic principle of mapping in cortex, as I said, stemming already from the retina. And how many of you guys heard, had some fMRI bashing in class, right? About how unuseful fMRI is, okay? Well, I want to sort of, first of all, I come from a background of physiology, but nowadays I do fMRI and other visual techniques as well. And I want to show you just that, okay, hold your horses. fMRI, you should know when, to what problems to apply fMRI, what problems are probably not very good to apply fMRI. And this is a classical problem for fMRI, okay, in humans. So the idea is the following. Let's use, I was talking about sort of a representation in 2 axes, remember, eccentricity and polar angle, right? So we can take an image and basically, as you'll see in a minute, use an image which is sort of what we call expanding rings. We'll see this in a minute. So you have a ring starting from the fovea and expanding further and further out. And that would map what? If we use that kind of stimulus. Okay? Eccentricity. Everyone agrees about this? Okay, because what you're changing is R, right? You're not, this, for all theta, what you're changing just R, right? So that would be mapping eccentricity. Or, the complementary mapping would be using what? A rotating wedge, right? So now, it's specific to a polar angle for all eccentricities, right? Okay, so this is indeed what you use in fMRI. And let me show you first what the stimuli look like. Okay, why doesn't it run? There we go, okay? Okay, so it's not the most stimulating stimulus for you, but for your cortex it's very good, okay? So the point is that you have to sort of maintain here, hopefully not have an epileptic seizure, I'm joking, okay? And basically now, so we're mapping now R, remember? Okay, and this is sort of a stimulus which is repetitive. And that's one example of a stimuli that we use for retinotopic mapping. And it's not a course on fMRI. Anyone taking our course, Tzvi Roth and me have a course on fMRI of the visual system, basically understanding the principles of the visual system using fMRI. Anyone taking it? Okay, you're encouraged to come if you want. We just started, as I said. You'll learn a lot about this. But this is sort of just a primer to give you sort of a feel for this. And that is okay. What do we have here? So we have a stimulus that's changing in time, starting from the fovea, and you have these rings, okay, which are expanding out, okay? And once we get to the far periphery, they begin again from the fovea, okay? So you have these expanding rings going out. And basically, okay, what you expect is that you're going to get a response in terms of the fMRI signal for a specific phase in which the stimulus is within the receptive field of the neurons, right? Now you're taking advantage of the fact that, okay, I don't know, what do you know about fMRI? You know it's poor spatial resolution, right? But the fact is that neurons in primary visual cortex have receptive fields which are overlapping, greatly overlapping. So even if you're going to take a sample of 1 million neurons, you're still going to get their population receptive field corresponding to a specific position in space. Okay? So that's why there's a good word. That's why this technique is very beneficial to map retinotopy. Okay? And what you expect is as you're moving, from this foveal annulus further out, you're going to activate different populations of neurons who have a different, a more eccentric receptive field. Okay? So that's the basic idea. Okay, and similarly for the wedge, you see something like that. Again, important, since we want to map retinal position, you have to maintain fixation in here. Okay? You want to be vigilant and not close your eyes, but you don't want to sort of move your eyes to here. Okay? Because why? If you move your eyes there, then you're not mapping, you want to map the peripheral part of the retina, right? In a specific polar angle. If you move here, well, that's not very good. Okay? So we need to sort of to monitor your eyes to make sure you're maintaining fixation at the center point, and then we can map polar angle. Okay? We'll get to that in a minute. Yes?
How do you prevent automatic fixate of the eye to the moving part? I can try to focus on the center, but
a little training, and you are able to. Okay, and actually, this is just tricks of the trade. You can, at some point, instead of presenting the fixation point here, at some random points, change this from red to green, and ask the subject to report every time he sees it changing from red to green, and then sort of he's compelled to focus here. Okay, or you can present specific letters there. Okay, and then he has to sort of detect what the letter was. And for that, if you're going to look here, you're going to be able to resolve what the letter is. Okay, so that's...
What are the uses of doing this today? I mean, today we already know there's retinal
Great, great. Okay, so we proved this, Holmes proved this in 1980. Well, first of all, we know this in primates. We didn't know this before we've done this in humans, except from Holmes' sort of lesion studies, right? The first thing is to see a correspondence between what we find in humans and what we find in primates. Okay, that's not very surprising, but the main thing I'm presenting this is because you think, fMRI is, you look at blood supply. You're not looking directly at here you are. You're not looking directly at neuronal responses, looking at blood supply. Well, who says that it corresponds to anything in the brain, okay? You get all these nice color pictures. What do they correspond to? I mean, this is something you must have heard of. I mean, it's something people typically say. And I'm saying, okay, don't throw the baby with the bathtub, with the water in the bathtub, okay? Realize that this is, okay, if you use this wisely, there's a lot to be done here, okay? And I'm presenting this because it's the basic example of something in which, okay, we have been able to replicate very beautifully what we know from physiology, although the spatial resolution, as you see here, also the temporal resolution of fMRI is quite poor. So if you give a stimulus at time 0, okay, and for, let's say, for a brief pulse of a stimulus, visual stimulus, the neuronal response is going to be delayed by maybe 50 milliseconds or so, okay, in V1. But the bold signal is going to be delayed by a few seconds, like typically like 3 to 4 seconds. It kicks in by 2 seconds and reaches its peak at about 5 seconds, then it drops, okay? So basically this is also sort of a sluggish response. And although it's a sluggish response, okay, and although it's, as I said, spatially the resolution is of the order of a millimeter or something like that, okay? And temporally the resolution, the best resolution is of the order of 500 milliseconds or to a second, okay? Then you can still get very important information using functional MRI. And it is true also that nowadays with a higher field magnet, one can also start looking at something of the resolution closer to columns. So have you heard about columns? We'll get to that in a minute. We need a break here before I continue. And so let's repeat at 4 o'clock, okay? כן, בהחלט כן. בהחלט כן, בהחלט כן. זה רק דוגמה, זה לא הדוגמה הכי, זה דוגמה בסיסית להראות, בשביל לאפס אתכם על העניין שהשיטה היא לא מטומטמת לחלוטין. אם יודעים מה לעשות איתה. וקצת לדבר על זה בהמשך. Okay, these are חבר'ה sorry, I'll switch back to English. The ones who are, yeah. קצת background.
הייתי שאני תואר ראשון במדעי המחשב.
תואר ראשון מדעי המחשב. שנה שלישית? מה, שנה א'?
לא יודע.
Yeah, I think he wanted to talk to you guys.
Yeah, טוב.
What a mess.
כל הניסוחים שלך?
Where are you from?
As in,
What?
how do you mean? Which institute?
Yeah. Huh? What?
תמונה אחת, תמונה שנייה. עכשיו צריך להשוות בין תמונה אחת לתמונה שנייה. יש לך בעיה של קורספונדנס. קוראים לזה, כן, יש לך תמונה אחת. כאילו יש לך, עכשיו יש לך תמונה אחת ותמונה שנייה. זה גם ברמה של כאילו לוויין. כן, שדר תמונות לכדור הארץ. זה כאילו, אוקיי, יש לך תמונה אחת, תמונה שנייה. אתה צריך להגיד, אוקיי, איפה הייתה תמונה? אתה יכול ללכת תזהה תנועה, אתה צריך להגיד, הנה פה הבוין, הנה עכשיו אני מזהה את הבוין.
לא.
כן,
תלוי מה, כאילו...
אתה יכול לעשות edge detection, זה משהו כזה, אתה יכול לעשות edge detection, לראות פה את ה-edges, ולזהות את ה-edges בתמונה הבאה, ולהגיד, זה מתאים לזה, זה מתאים לזה, ולכן התנועה היא תנועה כזאת. אוקיי? אתה איתי? עכשיו, אם אתה עושה את זה, קודם מתדרים נמוכים. יש לך פחות השוואות לה, יש לך בעיה. הבעיה היא שיש לך נגיד, אין פיקסלים בתמונה אחת, אין פיקסלים בשנייה, זה בעיה אקספוננט, למדתי קצת, אוקיי, על נושא של, אין, מה, כאילו,
לא, מעולה.
נכון? אוקיי, אז כן, אז עכשיו, יש לך בעיה גדולה. עכשיו, אם אתה עושה את זה, כאילו, אתה קודם מסתכל על זה, דרך התדרים הנמוכים, זה לא פס פילטר, לא פס פילטר, יש לך מעט השוואות, כי במקום להציג את התמונה הזו שיש לך פיקסלים נורא קטנים, יש לך פיקסלים גדולים. אתה יכול להשוות את התמונה בין שני פיקסלים גדולים, להעריך פחות או יותר איך הייתה התזוזה. עכשיו אתה עובר לפיקסלים יותר קטנים ואתה יכול לתקן אותה. אוקיי? זה הדוגמה של המולטי רזולושן של יתרון, אתה מתחיל מרזולוציה מאוד נמוכה, מוצא את ההתאמה פחות או יותר, אז אתה עובר לרזולוציה יותר גבוהה, אתה יכול לעשות את ההתאמה יותר טוב. זה אחד. אוקיי? זה רעיון ממדעי המחשב. כאילו היינו חושבים שגם מערכת הראייה עושה את זה בדיוק ככה, אנחנו לא יודעים.
מערכת הראייה עושה את זה או...
מערכת הראייה זה כולל את המוח, זה לא... כן. זה המחשבה של כאילו מולטי רזולושן. אנחנו לא יודעים בוודאות, אבל נראה שסביר שזה משמע.
יש גם את החיה הזאת, הלומינוס, יש לה המון עיניים? יש איזה...
העין המורכבת שלו.
יש איזו תופעה גם שקשורה רואים כאילו העין שיש לה
דיברתי על lateral inhibition, זה עיקרון שהוא עיקרון זה לא קשור לכמה עיניים.
לא, ברור שלא קשור. כן, קישרת את זה, זה משהו שיש בעיניים של הבן, כאילו של הפיים.
נכון, דיברתי על זה שזה ברמת הרייטינג, יש לך את הקשרים האלה, זה הסנטר סראונד הזה, נכון?
רק הסנטר סראונד?
סנטר סראונד, דוגמה, מה אתה מקבל פה, איך אתה מקבל את האפקט של הסראונד? זה דרך אינהיביציה, זאת אומרת, יש לך פוטורצפטור אחד, שאם האור הוא פה פוגע בפוטורצפטור הזה, אז הוא דרך ההוריזונטל סל שמקשר בין פוטורצפטור אחד לפוטורצפטור שני, הוא גורם פה שזה...
וזה לא קשור ללומד, נכון?
אני לא יודע, אני
חישבת את זה איפשהו, לא חישבת את זה ספציפי,
לא, אמרתי, כשיש אור, מתי תהיה התגובה הכי טובה? כאשר יש אור במרכז וחושך בפריפריה. ופה אני מדבר כשיש אור בפריפריה, אז מה התוצאה? היא גורם לאיניביציה על הפוטורצפטורים עם החיבור שלהם מהבייפולר לגנגליון. טוב, בקיצור, פתח להסתכל, אם משהו לא ברור, תבוא את זה.
לא, זה הבנתי.
אוקיי.
בעיקרון הבנתי את זה.
אז מה שצריך להגיד פה שזה אותו מערכת, שאתה רואה גם ב-living fossil הזה, לפני 300 שנה, אותו עיקרון.
זהו, סבבה, אני יודע שאמרת את זה, וזה בדיוק מה שרציתי לאמץ, כי לא הייתי
של החישורים לטרליים כאלה, של איניביציה לטרלית.
סבבה, זה בדיוק מה ש...
אוקיי.
לא הייתי מעט חשוב.
אוקיי. Okay, so we go on. There's a lecture by Robert Zatora right after me. I highly encourage you to hear him. He's speaking about the auditory system, but he's got some nice stuff. So you may want to stay in here after my... Okay, so we talked about bold response. Bold is the sort of the fMRI signal, and we said that this is temporally quite slow and sluggish. And what is the outcome of the fact that it is slow and sluggish? So let's say the following. Let's think about, so remember we had this sort of rotating wedge, rotating around a full circle, and doing this many, many times, right? So you see here, what we see here in color is basically the rotations. You see, okay, let's say that here at this position, that would correspond to red. So you see that you do a full circle, getting back to the same position here, and getting back to the same position here, and so on and so forth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 repetitions of the same cycle, okay? So this is what the subjects go through as they're fixating right here at the center, okay? And now, if you were to record neurons in V1, you would see that as long as the stimulus is within the receptor field, the neurons fire, okay? And therefore this is how they respond. And not only that, but you use a stimulus which is sort of flickering, and that actually gets the best response you can from V1 neurons. Okay. However, remember that we were talking about not a neuronal response here, but the fMRI signal. So the fMRI signal is delayed, okay? And therefore, if the neurons would respond at this red period here, the fMRI signal would start going up, as I said here, only 4 seconds or so afterwards. So you expect a delay here, and what you see here is basically what's called the hemodynamic response, the type of response that you expect in the fMRI signal. So the neurons respond here, you expect a delay of as I said, 4 seconds or so. So this would be the ideal response of the neurons given that you're recording the fMRI signal. Okay? So how do you, and I mentioned that you can do the retinotopy, okay? So here's just a coarse example to let you to understand this. Okay, so we're recording from, let's say, one voxel, okay? So one volume element, say here, a certain position here. And this is the fMRI signal that we get for this rotating wedge that I explained to you. So notice a few things here. First of all, the stimulus is periodic, and the response is quite periodic, okay? There's some noise. It doesn't get to the same level every time. You see some noise here, but you do see that this is quite replicative, right? So it's not total rubbish. If you were outside the visual cortex, if you were to look at it, remember, the good thing about the fMRI is that we're getting the response of all voxels throughout the brain. So if we were to record from a brain here, what would we expect for this visual stimulus here? Yeah, random noise, right? Just random fluctuations, okay? So we're looking for behavior that would correspond temporally to the visual stimulus we're using, okay? And here's one such voxel, which does respond sort of similarly to what we expect the ideal response here. So how can we analyze this? Now, a few things about analysis. Okay, 2 ways to do this. Any ideas? Anyone from us? Okay. One's written here. Cross correlation. Okay, you think about the second alternative, okay, as I'm explaining the cross correlation. No, maybe think in the background, but pay attention to what I'm saying. So when we say cross correlation, what do I mean? Okay? We take this model function here, and we cross correlate it with the actual data that we have received. Meaning that we're looking at the degree of fit between this function and this response, and we shift this function every time by one lag, and do this again, right? So we're sort of computing the correlation for each lag possible, right? And what are we going to see? What are we going to get?
Correlation.
Yeah. Okay. So the cross correlation is going to be this is going to be the output of the cross correlation as a function of the lag, right? And typically you're going to get something which, you know, this lag would be 1, 2, 3, 4, blah blah. And when I'm saying the numbers here correspond, I didn't mention this, to what's called the TR. It's the time of repetition. So we go back to the same slice typically every 2 seconds. Okay. So we scan the brain slice by slice, and once we get to the last one, we go back to the first one. And that's typically of the order of a second to 2 seconds, maybe 3 seconds. Okay, typically 2 seconds. Okay, so each sample here is a sample point at as I said, very poor time resolution of about 2 seconds. Okay, so the lag that we're going to use is this TR, this time of repetition of 2 seconds. Okay, and we're going to now compute the cross correlation, and we're going to get something which looks like, I don't know, something like that. And what would be the value here? That's the correlation coefficient, right? It could ideally 1 would be if what? If the response would be ideal just like the model function. Well, of course, with some noise, it's not going to be 1, okay? But it's going to be. So you can think about this as an R correlation coefficient here, and this is what you're going to get for. And once you find this, you want to know what's the phase which corresponds to the maximum here, right? So that's how you're going to label that specific voxel here. So if you look here, you see that there's different colors here correspond to the lag. Okay, so this would be at phase 0, and that would be the maximal phase. Again, 2 pi, because after 23 you get back to 0, right? So it's circular, right? And what you see here, I mean, I drew it just to sort of make it more clear to you. So each color here corresponds to the best stimulus per voxel, okay? So you can see, we're not going to get into the details here. This is sort of a coronal view from like that, right? That's the back of the brain. So you see that the right hemisphere here corresponds to stimuli at the left side, and the left hemisphere corresponds to stimuli at the right side. Okay, basically. Okay? And you can see it also here, left side corresponding to the right, and right side corresponding to the left visual field. Okay? And now, what if you were to, so here, if you were to look at voxel here, it doesn't have any color. Why is that? So you take a voxel, let's say the frontal cortex, or someplace here, outside visual cortex. As we said, the response is going to be completely noisy. So whatever lag you're going to use, the correlation is not going to be above some threshold. So if you notice here, typically what we have is a threshold that we're using, and we think, okay, we've got to mark voxels that fit that model, and the fit should be at least 0.5. Otherwise, it's useless, we're not interested in this. And of course, you can play, if you're going to make the threshold higher, what are you going to end up? Fewer voxels, right? Because you're going to ask for a higher criterion to mark the voxels, okay? So that's the first thing to state here. Second is that I said that there's another way to do this. Any ideas? Periodic stimuli. Fourier analysis, right? Okay, so here we are. Let's say that we have, as I said, we have 8 cycles here, okay, during the scan, and let's say that, okay, 8 cycles within a 30-minute, let's make it easier, okay? 10 cycles in, say, I don't know, 30 minutes. It takes, sorry. Let's think. It's not 30 minutes. Each cycle is about 30 seconds. Okay, so 10 cycles, 30 seconds times 10 is 300 seconds, which is okay. So we're talking about if we do the Fourier analysis of this. Okay, maybe we should think about this. It's easier to think about this in terms of cycles and not cycles per second, just because, you know, in terms of hertz, it's very, very small. Okay, right? Because we said here that there's like 8 cycles in, 10 cycles in 5 minutes. Okay, so in terms of hertz, it's very, very small. But this is cycles, and what we're gonna look for here is, okay, the Fourier component. So what do we expect? Say that we use something which says here 8 cycles. Excuse me for mixing you up with 10 cycles, 8 cycles, 6 cycles. Okay, but I hope you can follow me here. So here we have 8 cycles. So we expect the peak to be what? We look at we do the FFT, right? The Fourier, and we're looking at the energy here, or the amplitude spectra. That's the term used. Okay, and this is 1, let's say 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. What do we expect? To have a peak at the 8 cycles, right? So it should be something like that, and there should be a nice peak at 8 cycles, okay? If it's responsive to the visual stimulus. If it isn't, there shouldn't be a peak there, right?
But you won't see the phase.
Okay, now what about the phase? Good. You won't see the phase, but you can see the phase, because
It's the conflict.
remember, yes, when you're dealing. So, who's ever heard of Fourier analysis? Okay, great. Okay, who has heard the name Fourier analysis but has no idea what's it about? Who's shy? Okay. Okay. So, when you have a stimuli and you look at the Fourier analysis, you're looking at repetitive phenomena, right? And as we said, okay, if you're presenting the stimuli at 8 cycles during the experiment, you should see a peak, if it's responsive, at 8 cycles, right? Now I was asked about, we're interested in the phase, not just the fact that it's responsive. This should be, we should decide on a criterion here to say, okay, if you don't get a peak above some level with respect to the background, then this is not visually responsive. But that's not enough. We want to know what that phase is, okay? But remember, maybe you've heard this, maybe not. For each, along with the amplitude spectra, you have what's called a phase spectra. Meaning that, remember, just to sort of give you the intuition, when we're talking about Fourier, we're talking about, let's say we're talking about something which is 8 cycles, and it's something which has 8 cycles, 1, 2, 3, blah, blah, you continue this for 8, right, during the experiment, okay? There's one aspect which is missing here. You can also play with a phase here. So this, okay, would be the same, have the same energy, 8 cycles, but it has a different phase. How can we find the phase? Well, for each, when you do the Fourier analysis, for each frequency, you also have the phase spectra, which would look like this. And the phase spectra is between 0 and 2 pi. Okay, it would look something like that. Okay, and this would be 6 and 8 and 4 and 2. And what are you looking for? You're looking at the phase, which corresponds to 8 cycles. Okay, so you're looking at that phase, and that's your answer. Right? So you're fitting once you have this sinusoid here, basically, you have a sinusoid. Now you're fitting its phase so it would fit best this behavior. Okay, so that's another approach. I mentioned this just to get, okay, there's 2 approaches. There's pros and cons to each of them, but just to, that you have an idea of what I'm talking about. Okay, hopefully this was clear. So here's an example. This is an experiment done by Brian Lundell's lab. The expanding ring here. This is sort of the one hemisphere here. This is sort of what's called a medial view. So you have the 2 hemispheres. You're looking at one of them. Okay. So from the center, right? So This is called the calcine sulcus. This is corresponding to V1 here. That's the back of the brain. The eye would be here, okay? So that's the back of the brain here. And now, what we can do here is look, here they're color coding what is the best area which generates a good activation as a function of the position of your voxel, okay? So here's the stimulus. The stimulus starts from something centered, and it's an expanding ring moving out, okay? And the color coding here is for what is the best phase, okay? If it's blue here, it would mean that it responds to the outer ring here. And if it's red, it responds to the inner ring, okay? And you can see it here. Here's just a time course, okay? So this is, if you are to record from voxels along here, the calcine sulcus, along this stripe here, you can find that, okay, cell number 1 has this sort of response. Look at cell number 2, it has a different sort of response, a bit of a lag, right? Bigger lag. And cell number 3, further on. Corresponding to the lag, you start with something at the center. The stimulus starts from the center and moves out, right? Remember the expanding rings? So this corresponds to that, okay? Just to let you understand this. So that's the raw data, and from that you can compute that map. And similarly, if you're using this rotating wedge, again, the color coding here corresponds to what is, if the stimulus is, you know, at the upper quadrant or the lower quadrant. Which hemisphere would that be? Yeah, right, yeah, the right hemisphere. And again, notice that there's sort of a beautiful repetition of what we've seen in what I've shown you in Holmes' work from 1918. You see that these colors are going from blue to red here, right? And they correspond to, you see, what we call the lower calcarine. This is the calcarine sulcus. So what's lower, below it, corresponds to the upper left quadrant, and what's in the upper calcarine, okay? So this is up, this is down, or what's called dorsal and ventral. Upper calcarine corresponds to that. It's going from the here, the horizontal meridian to the vertical meridian. So it's going from dark blue to the greenish part here. And by the way, not to mention, people ask me, you can use the same technique to map V2, V3, and so on and so forth. So you see here, this is the border between V1 and V2, and similarly, this is another border between V1 and V2 at the dorsal side. Details, too much details is not good for you, so we'll leave it here. But this is a good technique to map not just primary visual cortex, but other areas as well.
So the answer is no. You can't map. Other V2, V3.
Well, yes. We'll see V2, V3, V4. Yeah, there's quite a few. There's like 30 different visual areas known in the macaque monkey. Okay, some of them. We'll get there. Okay? Now, another thing to notice here is if you look at this, when you do this eccentricity mapping, you see that the red area is much bigger than the blue and sort of violet areas, which correspond to the periphery here. And you can quantify this by what's called the magnification factor. The magnification factor says, okay, how much of cortex is devoted to the central? 0 would mean to the central center of gaze, and how much of it is devoted to the same degree at 10 degrees or 15 degrees. And you can see that there's a drop, a clear exponential drop showing the clear magnification. And you can see it here that, you know, the fovea, central vision, has a much bigger area corresponding to it than the periphery. And this has been done. You see here different data from what I mentioned to you, the 2-deoxyglucose, the anatomical techniques used in monkeys, which are highly invasive. You have to kill the animal to see this, of course. And from functional imaging done by Martin Serino and Boynton, and you see that basically they'll correspond. Nice to see. Okay. So here's the cortical magnification factor, and that again has a parallel in terms of psychophysics. And the parallel is, I mentioned this to you, is that if you foveate here, what is the size of the litter that you need in order to resolve this. Okay, now of course it depends on distance. Okay, it's in a given distance. But basically, it does. The size that you need is growing as it is further in the periphery. Okay, so nice, very much like the magnification factor. Okay, so I've talked about retinopathy. We'll move on to other characteristics of V1. Some of it you've heard. Okay, so you all heard about simple cells and complex cells, analyzed Jubel and Wiesel's paper. Don't look at me like this with a D, right? Like a week ago, right? So you guys know all this, so you know that, okay, as we have moved from the retina to LGN, got to the cortex, beyond layer 4C, cells are oriented, right? And they're organized in columns so that if you are sort of moving your electrode trap, you see that, the preferred orientation changes gradually, not in a jump. It's not random here, but changes gradually. That you've seen in the paper, right? And okay, so you know this. Oh, just to mention, another technique that's been used well after Jubel and Wiesel, optical imaging. Did you hear anything about this, Mamadi? Yeah? No? Okay, so optical imaging is a technique in which we sort of invasive. We have to open a hole in the skull, and basically we're sort of using light at a specific wavelength, and typically, initially, that has been used with what's called voltage-sensitive dyes. So when you apply a voltage-sensitive dye on the cortex, on the surface of cortex, and you light it with a specific light, you get a response of this voltage-sensitive dye, and it basically follows the sort of mean voltage of the neurons at that area. Now, the wonderful thing about optical imaging is that the resolution is of the order of tens of microns. Okay, and so you can get a picture. Okay, here's a picture that you get. You're using. Okay, now here we are looking at visual cortex. So surprise, surprise, we were using these. This is a Milan Grünwald's work from like the 90s. They've been using grading in different orientations. And okay, you give a specific orientation, say this orientation, you get a pattern of activity which is reflected here, and this is sort of, it's an image. So the areas which are darker are.
That's active. That's active.
I guess so. I guess so. I think that I blinked there because I wasn't sure which way it is. I think that the dark areas are less active and the bright areas are more active. Okay, and the point to see is that if you see this image here, and you compare it to another image, say at sort of the orthogonal direction, so here the numbers correspond to the orientation of the grid, you see a different picture here. So where you had a white blob here, you have a dark blob here. Why? Because if cells are orientation tuned, they respond best to this orientation, they would not respond to the orthogonal direction. You with me? Do you need air conditioning here? Because I'm getting hot. Or open a, in rational way, let's open a, I'm getting very hot. Well, not very hot, but okay, the other thing. Question? Yes?
In the area of the cortex where the fovea
Yes.
colors are processed, so the processing is a bit different from the other parts of the cortex.
Well, not really. I mean, the receptor field is smaller, but generally, if you look at fovea, you still have orientation tuning. So it's not very different in terms of sort of the fovea. You have just a higher resolution in terms of the receptor fields are much smaller. Okay, and there's many more neurons in terms of coverage.
You have colors as well, right?
Okay, I didn't talk about, okay, the colors here have nothing to do with color out there in the world. Now, you're right, I did not mention color, right? I was talking about, I mentioned color very briefly last talk. I didn't mention it. I'll mention it in a few slides and get to that. But basically what you get is sort of a picture. If you sort of overlay these and you look at the areas which are responsive to one orientation or another, you can now do this in a color plot. And here what you get is the following. Basically, you get sort of this nice plot. Okay, so this is, you can think about this as 2 centimeters by a centimeter of cortex, sort of a map of V1. And again, now the color here corresponds to the best orientation. And you can see again that there's some there's clusters, right? It's not that if nearby neurons did not have the same orientation, you wouldn't see anything organized as here, you just see a random coloring, right? And the fact that you see that this is sort of clustered suggests that indeed this is a nice replication of Hubel and Wiesel, so they were right about that. Okay, another thing you've heard about, I'm sure if you've read Hubel and Wiesel, this thing about binocular preference, right? Ocular preference. So I'm not going through that, but basically what you have to know is that, if you look at the LGN, neurons in LGN get their input either from the right eye or from the left eye, but when you get to cortex, beyond layer 4C, you find that neurons get input from both eyes, okay? And this may change. The degree of input they get from one eye and another may change. We'll rush through this because some stuff you have to read. I'm not going to cover it all, but just to mention something about your color, well, that's something that Hubel and Wiesel missed altogether, right? And they report they got the Nobel Prize in 1981.
They didn't show colors similar.
Correct, but they have reported.
Maybe they chose another.
Okay. The fact is that neurons which are sensitive to color don't have this orientation selectivity. So if you see, so if you were to advance your electrode, you should see a patch in which you don't see any orientation selectivity. And it's something they do not report. Okay? Okay, so who knows? I don't know. Okay? I'm not saying, they have not reported that. Okay? So this has come up. That's actually Hubel with Margaret Livingston, 20 years later, in which they've used this cytochrome oxidase labeling. And then you see these, don't bother about the white points here, but see these reddish blobs here? And these are now, okay, so they found that, when you do the staining, you get these blobs, and wondered, okay, what is it? Is there any functional significance to that? And then they inserted electrodes to where these blobs are, and then they found that these cells are color selective. So while I was talking about, on-center and off-center cells, which are sort of black and white, light in the center, dark in the background, or the opposite, there's also a set of cells in what's called the parvocellular layers, right from the retina, projecting their information through LGN to cortex, which prefer, say, red at the center and green at the background, or green at the center, red at the background. Okay, so they're sort of basically color, looking at color differences, not at luminance differences. And here's just to illustrate this. Typically, interestingly enough, these, if you look at the color, sort of images which have only information in color and not in brightness, okay, like the color contrast rather than brightness contrast which you have here. You see that the image is a little more fuzzy, right? It's less clear where the borders are than it is here, right? Because the information from the parvo system is somewhat fuzzy in terms of space information. Okay, so that's just to make the point that there is also color information going along. Okay, and if you think about the structure of V1, so there's this columnar organization, input deriving from the LGN and to layer 4, and from there to other layers, and you see these blobs here are the patches in which there is color information. Neurons unselected to orientation, not selectivity to color. Okay. So great, I've covered till now the information flow from the retina through the LGN to cortex. Okay, but I have to tell you something about, and I mentioned that there's neurons which are orientation selective, and I want to relate this to a few other features. Okay. First feature is, if we think about these neurons in V1, that they're orientation selective, okay, and they also have a receptive field, and what you see here basically is the best stimulus for different neurons. So this would be the receptive field in terms of its position in space, and also its size and best stimulus. So All of them are orientation tuned, okay? And you can see that they're also spatial frequency tuned. So this is higher spatial frequency than this one and that one, right? And this is another way to plot it. This way, you see here each sort of sphere here corresponds to one neuron, so it's tuned both to orientation, it's a filter to orientation and spatial frequency, okay? And each one of them, so that's just a few here, so they correspond to a different position in this space. Is that clear? Again, so here, this is sort of radial. This would be a higher spatial frequency meaning more stripes, okay? And an orientation which sort of covers 360 degrees. Yes? Okay. Happy to hear that. Okay, great. So you have this. Does that sort of strike something to you? Strike a bell? What is this? What am I showing here? Yeah, okay. Back to Fourier analysis, okay? So, okay, you can represent any image by its Fourier components, right? Now, the image, okay, it's a little more difficult because the image is 2D, right? So it's two-dimensional, okay? So you can think about this. Okay, so here's these filters that you're talking about. And you see, okay, these are along the sort of horizontal dimension, so they align vertically, okay? And this would be a spatial frequency of 0, and as you move here, you're going to have more bars, more of these stripes, right? Because the spatial frequency grows. And you have these in all orientations, so this would correspond to the same, but the orientations now are in the horizontal plane, right? And now, okay, so you can think about these as sort of filters to a specific area. Yeah, so each one of them, each square here corresponds to a specific spatial frequency and a specific orientation. So if you take these, what you change along here is just the spatial, as you move from the center here out, the spatial frequency becomes bigger, okay? And I do here, again, the spatial frequency becomes bigger, but it's a different orientation, okay? Very similar to what I described here, okay? There's a mapping of two elements. Again, these are the separate fields, so in one, okay, as you move here, spatial frequency becomes bigger, and as you move along here, you know, as you change the angle here, corresponds to a different orientation, okay? So these are sort of filters in two dimensions. One is spatial frequency, the second is orientation. Okay? So, one idea for the principle of organization P1 is what's called Gabor filters. Gabor filters is sort of these filters which are sensitive to a frequency, jointly to a frequency and orientation. Okay? And, okay, so you can think about it. Here's another example. And so you can see, okay, as you move here, okay, you see that these are all tuned to the same orientation here, but as you move from this one to this one to this one, the frequency becomes bigger, right? Right? If you compare this, there's a lot of these that are going to get into this stimulus here, right? So the spatial frequency is becoming bigger, although we're drawing here only one cycle, okay? In each of them. Okay, and you see that as you change here, what you change is the orientation. By the way, if you look at this one, look at this and this, these are called quadrature pairs. Okay, meaning that they're the same frequency. This one are the same frequency, but they're just a shift of phase of 90 degrees. Okay, so what do we mean by that? Okay, you may have something which is sort of, that's the, say, the optimal stimulus. Okay, this would be luminance as a function of x. Okay, so that would correspond to the receptive field. Okay, I'm just drawing this. You could, if you want, you draw this light stripe, dark stripes. You follow me, right? Quadrature pair, meaning taking the same frequency, shifting it by 90 degrees. Okay. Okay, so it would look like that. Okay? This means that's like here, and dark here, okay? While it was light here, light here, light here, and so on. So they're same frequency, just shifted by 9 degrees, and they're what's called a quadrant shift, a pair, you know, corresponding to a sine and cosine. Okay, so that's the analogy here.
When you say frequency, you mean that
Spatial frequency. I mean spatial frequency.
Yeah. Okay, spatial frequency. How do you change the spatial frequency in matter of degrees? I understand the graph. I don't understand it in the picture itself. When you say
This is going to be, say, okay, this is going to be light here, and light here. Okay. Okay, you're with me?
Yeah.
And then if you take this, it's going to be the exactly opposite picture. Okay, where it was light. Yeah, it's the same picture.
I see it. I don't see, like, the picture doesn't show it, but I see it when you...
Okay, it's a magnification of what's shown in the picture. You're right. It could be, okay, you can see that this and this are the same, they're just shifted by 9 degrees. Okay? Okay. Another thing to notice is that if you look at V1, you see that, okay, receptor fields become bigger as you move from the center further away. Okay, so receptor fields become bigger. And typically, they're tuned to lower spatial frequency. Okay, so at the center, receptor fields are very, very tiny. Okay, much less than a degree. They would be of the order of 0.5, 0.5 degree. Okay, so a degree of visual image is your thumb at a distance of 60 centimeters. Okay, 360 degrees. Okay, so we're talking something of the order of maybe a tenth of your thumb at 60 centimeters. That would be the receptor field at the fovea in V1. Okay, very fine resolution. And you see here the degree of, as you're moving to the periphery, either in azimuth or elevation, the receptor fields become bigger. Okay, so they'd be of the order of maybe a few degrees by the time you're out in the periphery. Okay. So another thing is, okay, spatial frequency tuning in V1. So you see that different neurons have different spatial frequency tuning, as I showed here. So here's spatial frequency, and here's the contrast sensitivity. So the higher the sensitivity, meaning that you need less of a contrast, okay, to distinguish between different spatial frequencies. Okay, so you see, typically they have this nice tuning function, being specific to a specific spatial frequency, and there's a variation in terms of the sensitivity of individual neurons. And I want to relate this to what's called the contrast sensitivity function. The contrast sensitivity function is the following. Notice that we start here from gratings which are very, very, high spatial frequency. As we move here, it becomes lower, correct? And if you notice, here you can resolve on what you get in the y-axis here is contrast is reduced. Okay, so contrast is maximal here. As you're moving up, contrast is reduced. And I'm sure that's true for all of you that, okay, you cannot tell me what's going on here, but if you move here, you can actually resolve the bars here, right? So that gives you something about the contrast sensitivity function. It's sort of something which is low for very low frequencies, then it gets to a peak and then it drops again. I mean, if you're going to have, depends on the distance, but if you're going to have very, very fine, narrow bands like this, you're not going to be able to resolve them again. So that's where you have drop at high spatial frequencies. And you can think about this, so this is the way to draw it, okay? X-axis here would be spatial frequency. Y-axis here would be the contrast sensitivity. Okay? So high here meaning high sensitivity. Okay? So what do we see? We see that at some point, first of all, look at the black bar here. Okay? And this is your classical contrast sensitivity. So as you're moving to higher spatial frequencies, you cannot tell that there's dark light bars because they blend together. And all you see is, the average of the two, and this is like beyond 30 cycles per degree, you're unable to see this, and this is typical contrast sensitivity. So, now what happens, this is now psychophysics relating to what I talked about before. Beautiful work, I think, by Campbell and Robson from the 1960s. What if you use a grading of a specific spatial frequency? So you're presenting something which looks, I don't know, something like that, okay? And you're presenting it at high contrast for a long time, okay? and it has a specific spatial frequency, let's say 5 cycles per degree. So you're watching this for, let's say, a minute. You're asked to watch this, okay? And now what I do is present you gradings of different contrast, and you have to say, is there a grading there, or is there just noise? And what you see is, if you adapt to a specific spatial frequency, you get a drop in the contrast sensitivity, and that's presented here by the triangles here. And the drop is specific. It's not for all spatial frequencies. It's for the spatial frequency of the adapting stimulus. Yes?
Drop means I can distinguish it's worse.
Yes, so
after I...
yeah, so you see, it's worse because it dropped here, okay? So the lower it is, that's a sensitivity. Higher number means better sensitivity. So you adapt and you lost your sensitivity, but you lost your sensitivity just to a specific spatial frequency. And if you sort of measure what is the degree of loss that you have here, you compare this and that, you get this here, okay? So that's the threshold elevation, that's the increase or the decrease in the loss. So the loss is maximal for the adapting frequency, and there's some loss for other frequencies, yeah, but it's not so for very different frequencies, okay? So you can think about this as sort of a bandwidth of effect that you get, okay? Does it remind you something? It reminds me something. It's what I showed you before about, and this is before you do the recording, but you adapt a specific group of cells which are selective to one frequency. And typically they have this tuning. They're sensitive to a narrow band of frequencies. They're not sensitive to all frequencies. Okay? Yes?
That's how you explain the adaptation, right?
That's the adaptation effect, yeah. Okay? So that's how the physiology of the adaptation effect that I'm trying to explain. Okay. I'm moving backwards, so. 5 more minutes we've got, so if there's something really unclear, I will take a question. If not,
I need to understand why that adaptation causes decrease.
because think about it. Okay, you see something very, very strong. Okay, you activate the cells very, very strongly, and then you present something very weak. Okay, the contrast is very low. So you're unable to see this because you have adapted to the strong contrast. Okay, it's just like the same thing as sort of dark adaptation. If I'm here with a light on me, okay, now you present me, you take me out and put me in a dark room, I'm not going to be able to see anything. So the similar sort of adaptation, different mechanism, but similar principle, okay? Good. Okay,
So
last.
if somebody like the same spatial resolution, just at a low...
Same spatial frequency?
Same spatial frequency, low contrast, then there won't be any adaptation? Or
Yes, no, okay, so the adapting stimulus has to be high contrast, good point, okay? You're not going to get the effect if you're presenting it at low contrast and then testing it.
For a lot of time?
Well, there may be some, but to get the maximal adaptation, you want this to sort of activate the cells maximally, and this is done with high contrast. Okay, last thing which relates to Fourier analysis, beautiful stuff, Campbell and Robson from '68 that I want to mention. Okay, what if you're now using two types of stimuli? Once you're using what's called sort of sine wave grading. So this is what I drew before. This sort of, it's modulated in a sinusoid way. Or this is called a square wave, right? So its function is a square wave, right? So one is looking like that, and the other one is looking like that. You can't see. Can you see? You can't see. But you wouldn't. I think you follow the idea. One, in terms of luminance, looks like that with the square wave, and the other one looks like that. Okay? So the second one's line. Okay. Now, so you're presenting stimuli either as a square wave or a sine wave, and now you're measuring the contrast sensitivity. So you're presenting a stimulus. You have to say, is there a sine wave, or is there a sort of a wave here, or is there just nothing? Okay? And you drop. You drop the contrast until it's very, very hard to tell this, and you measure the threshold per spatial frequency. What do you see? Okay, which one is better, this one or that one? Any idea? This one. Okay, why? First of all, you see it looks easier, right? Why is this? Beautiful idea, okay? Very, very nice. Here's an example. You do psychophysics, and you come up and you can show really cool stuff. Okay? You use a square wave. Now you do the Fourier transform of a square wave. So you do the Fourier transform of a square wave, you try to fit it with sinusoids, right? That's the idea. So, okay, if you use this, here's what's the fundamental frequency that you use. Well, notice, first of all, it's bigger in terms of its amplitude than the square wave, okay? And if you want to start, you want to now approximate it better, you're going to do, okay, so this is called the sort of Fourier decomposition. You're going to use, if you use the fundamental f, you're going to use also 3f at a third of the amplitude of f, okay? And then you're going to get this one. And if you want to get even better, use 5f at a fifth of the amplitude, okay? This is, you know, I'm not proving this to you, but this is what's called Fourier decomposition, okay? Okay, now, so, going back, and notice that the difference between a square wave and a sine wave in terms of the amplitude is 4 divided by pi. So pi is 3.4, okay? So it's a bit better, okay? So the modulation of the sine wave, okay, is for a given square wave is bigger than for the square wave, right? So if you go back to here, and you notice, okay, so what do you see? You see here that the triangles, okay, which correspond to the square waves, and the black circles, which correspond to the sine waves, well, the triangles are consistently better than the black circles, and the ratio between the two is 4 over pi. So you see, all over these frequencies, the ratio of performance that you get for the square wave and the sine wave is a ratio of 4 over pi. Exactly as one would expect from a Fourier decomposition. Beautiful, right? Okay, last point. We get this divergence at low frequency. Any idea why? Okay. That's the last point. Okay. Look at the shape of the contrast sensitivity function. As I'm moving from here, okay, this is using the sine wave. As I'm moving from here further on, what do I see? Sensitivity increases, right? So think about the lowest frequencies that you use, okay? You have an answer, Dana?
I have, yes,
Okay, so, and here's the sort of the decomposition, okay? So what's the answer?
So in the very low you have the retinal preprocessing, so we have the contrast, the borders enhancement, which was spoken before.
No, it's directly related to the Fourier decomposition. So look here, okay? So you get, if you're looking at the square wave, there's the fundamental, and a third of the amplitude of the sine wave at 3 times the fundamental frequency, okay? Well, it's a third of the amplitude, so it's much smaller than this one. But what if your resolution is better for 3f than f? If you're at a very low frequency, if your fundamental stimulus is a very low frequency, well, its resolution could be lower than the resolution of the frequency at 3 times its frequency, 3f. So let's take an example, okay? Okay, here's this one, here, at about 0.3 cycles per degree. 3 times it would be something around here, right? 1 cycle per degree. Okay, so the resolution at 3 times 0.3 cycles per degree is less than 100. The resolution at 1 cycle per degree is 300. So the ratio is bigger than 3, meaning that you are going to detect the stimulus not on the basis of f, but on the basis of 3f. Why? Because your resolution is better at 3f, although the amplitude of 3f is a third of the amplitude of f. Okay? So that's homework for you. We're gonna. This is okay. Remember, you take a square wave here. You see that the amplitude of 3f is a third of what it is in f. But if your resolution, if your sensitivity at f is very, very poor, and your sensitivity at 3f is 3 times or more the sensitivity at f, you're going to pick up, if there's a sine wave there, or not based on 3A. Okay? And therefore, you're going to deviate from that ratio here for the low, very low frequencies. That's the idea. Okay? I think it's time to break, and we'll see you Wednesday, 12, right? Okay. One last message. I talked with people who are presenting next week. Another thing, if any of you, I mentioned our course, the fMRI course, if you can still join in. We have a forum, but we'd like to have a few more people from other places as well. And if you're interested in the topics I'm discussing, I am recruiting for my lab, PhD students, so you're welcome to come and hear a little more about what we're up to. Okay? It's not now, but the Torah is, at your free time.
אפשר להסביר את ההבדל בתדרים הנמוכים?
כן.
בזה שבתדר מרובע, בצורה מרובעת תמיד יהיה לך את הקצוות הפתוחים, ולכן תמיד יהיה לך תדרים גבוהים.
כשיש לך גל מרובע, אז תמיד יש לך F, יש לך 3F.
נכון, אבל תמיד יהיו לך תדרים גבוהים כדי להגדיר טוב את החיתוך החד, נכון?
כן, תמיד.
זה אולי.
מה?
זה אולי. זה בדיוק ההבדל.
נכון, מה התדרים הגבוהים? שאתה מדבר על תדרים גבוהים.
גבוה יותר.
3F יותר גבוה מ-F, ו-3 יותר גבוה. עכשיו, אם אתה הלכת ל-5F, אז הפרדת עוד פעם, כי האמפליטודה של 5F היא 50 מ-F. אוקיי? אז אם המודולציה קטנה לא תעשות את זה. בדרך כלל אתה מצליח לזהות את ה-square wave על סמך 3F, לא על סמך 5F. כי הוא חמישית האמפליטודה של...
תראה בבקשה, אחד אחורה. פה, נניח פה יש לך תדר מאוד נמוך.
כן.
נכון, תדר נמוך.
אבל ברוב.
אם הסינוס כל כך נמוך, שאתה לא בכלל לא מסתדות את הגדלים.
כן, הרזולוציה שלך של F היא לא טובה. נכון? כי הנה, זה הרגישות ל-F.
נכון, דורק לככל שתתקנים את התדר.
כן, כן. עכשיו, לא, בחרת איזשהו גל מרובע, שהוא נגיד תדר מאוד נמוך. עכשיו השאלה, הגל המרובע הזה, תדר מאוד נמוך, אתה יכול להשיג אותו תחום של סימטריה. אז זה הפונדמנטל שלו, התדר הבסיסי, שלה הרזולוציה היא מצ'וקמקת. עכשיו אתה מסתכל על התדר שלו זה פי 3 ממנו. העלייה ברזולוציה היא יותר גדולה מאשר הנפילה באמפליטודה. הנפילה באמפליטודה היא ש3F תמיד יש לו מודולציה של רק שליש ממה של F. אבל אם העלייה ברזולוציה היא יותר גדולה מפי 3. אז יותר טוב להשתמש בזה, אתה תזהה אותו. אוקיי, זה הכל.
איבדתי אותך חלק מהזמן בבורד, בפוריום.
טוב. טוב.
מה זה מייצג?
א', אני לא בטוח שאתה אישי.
רגע, זה...
כן, תשמע. אני לא יכול להשאיר את הכל בבורד, זה כאילו הסיגנל של ה-fMRI, אוקיי? הסיגנל של ה-fMRI נקרא גם בורד.
אוקיי, מה הוא מייצג הסיגנל הזה?
כמו שאמרתי, הוא מייצג באופן עקיף פעילות עצבית. הבעיה הראשונה היא שהוא מייצג זרימת הדם לאזור הזה. לא נכנסתי בכלל לפיזיקה של סיפור למה. הוא מייצג את זרימת הדם, וכאשר יש לך גירוי שגורם לתגובה חזקה של הנוירונים, אז יש הזרמה מוגברת של דם לאותו אזור. כי יש דרישה מטאבולית. וזה הסיגנל שאפשר לעשות בעצם אזור אותו בעצם. אוקיי? ואז זה לא סיגנל ישיר של הפרוטין, זה סיגנל ישיר.
זה הבנתי, אבל את האנליסיס שעשית מזה ואת המאפים, לא של הלוג והפלוחה שאחרי זה לא הספקתי.
תסתכל עוד פעם ותנסה לפתח את זה. כאילו באופן עקרוני, יכול לחזור לרפרנסים, אבל באופן עקרוני, אנחנו הולכים גירוי ואנחנו מזיזים אותו באופן שיטתי. אוקיי? ועכשיו, אז צריך לעשות את הקורלציה, אז צריך לעשות את הקרוס קורלציה. יש שתי שיטות שונות שדיברתי. ואז מה שמע איתך זה מה הפאזה המתאימה, כי הגירוי הוא פריודי.
מה הכוונה בפאזה?
יש לך פיקסציה. נניח שיש לך גירוי שהוא משהו שהוא כזה. אוקיי? אז הוא נע ככה, עושה סיבוב, חוזר לזה. הפאזה היא איפה, נגיד עכשיו יש לך השדה הרצפטיבי של התנאים זה פה, אז הם יגיבו כאשר הגירוי יהיה פה, יתחילו להגיב כשהגירוי נכנס לפה, יפסיקו להגיב שהם פה.
זה הפאזה.
כן, עכשיו אם זה פאזה 0 הם יגיבו כשהוא פה. אם זה פאזה של פאי הם יגיבו פה. נכון?
אין בעיה.
אוקיי,
אז עכשיו אתה מחפש את
אז יש לך משהו שהוא פריודי.
נכון.
אוקיי? גם זה וגם זה הם אותה פריודה, אבל זה בפאזה חלק משהו.
נכון, זה בדיוק בפאזה.
אתה מחפש?
רשימה הזאת.
אוקיי? אז אתה מחפש איזה פאזה מתאימה שבה יש כאילו יש לך איזשהו, דיברנו על שתי שיטות, אחת זה בפוריה אנליסיס, והשנייה זה מקרוס קורלציה, יש לך את התגובה.
זה כאילו הספייקינג?
לא, זה הבול, זה כאילו הסמילה של ה-FMRI.
אוקיי, זה אומר...
וזה המודל.
שנותן לך את ה...
ויש לך איזשהו מודל ואתה עושה קרוס קורלציה ביניהם. כלומר, אתה מחפש את הפאזה המתאימה, מסיט אותו כך שהפאזה...
אני מגיע הלג, מה העניין של הלג?
הלג הוא העניין של הפאזה.
אוקיי.
אוקיי, אתה מסיט את זה ומחפש את ההתאמה.
אז אנחנו בעצם חיפשנו את ההתאמה מפה לפה על אותו נוירון רספטור פילד, נכון, אנחנו מדברים על אותו פאזה. אני מתרגם את זה לשפה שלי. סבבה? עכשיו אתה אומר שה-FMRI נותן לך לג מסוים, ואתה מחפש את הלג הזה, ובגלל זה אתה...
עושה שיפט, כל פעם אתה עושה קרוס קורלציה בשיפטים שונים, מחפש איפה זה הקורלציה.
בגלל זה אפשר להשתמש ב-FMRI. זה היה כאילו, מה הוא נותן לך אחרי זה?
זה רק להראות שאוקיי, תשמע, יש לך סיגנל שהוא מתאים לגירוי שהוא נמצא במקום מסוים בעולם. תגובה היא רק כאשר הוא נמצא במקום מסוים.
עכשיו למה אמרנו שהוא לא שימושי בכלל? ה-FMRI או לא שימושי?
אני רציתי להסביר שהוא כן שימושי.
כן, אבל זה הקטע, מישהו שאל למה הוא בעצם שימושי. אמרנו שהוא לא שימושי, הגענו למסקנה...
לא, אמרנו שהוא
לא מספיק שימושי.
לא, אמרנו שהוא לא... direct measure שפעילות.
זהו, אוקיי.
מאוד שימושי.
אז איך אפשר להשתמש בו כפעילות? וככה אפשר להשתמש בו, הבנתי.
לדוגמה.
לדוגמה.
כן.
הבנתי. יופי.
רק להדגיש כך, תשמע.
לא, זה סך הכל נראה לי זה מה שלא ממש הבנתי. גם קצת מהסוף. תיכנס לזה. תודה.
בטוח שאפשר, השאלה אם אפשר למצוא פרנטרייט,
לא, אני חושבת שאי אפשר.
אי אפשר?
ללמוד זה יכול, רק מה שמדהים אותך. הכללות, על הפנים. אני רוצה generalize. Can you make a person smart?
מה זה הכללות? את תשמיעי למישהו קצת כישרון מוזיקלי, לא רמה, מוזיקלי מסוים.
stimulus instead of yeah, because I mean, כן, יש לי מלא
Even my mentor, I went for my master's, and I did auditory process. So Mr. has been studying audition. And audition is a specific case of the senses of a specific case.
So I just need 5 minutes to
Okay,
remind
sure.